Hello, everybody, and welcome to Session 2 of the 2023 UPRT Safety Summit for Professional Pilots Worldwide. My name is Paul B.J. Ransbury. I'm the CEO of Aviation Performance Solutions, and it's my great honor to be hosting this session today. Before we get started, I must say that Session 1 was absolutely amazing by Delta Airlines and Global Airways with Captain Brian Sims and Brad Bennett. So if you hadn't had a chance to see that, I really strongly recommend you go there. It was really a fantastic representation of not only risk mitigation through the prevention of loss of control, but also, as we saw in the A340, of effectively applying recovery capabilities with a properly implemented UPRT program. So for this session, we're going to be talking about elevating corporate flight department safety risk management to counter loss of control in flight. Myself and Sonny Bates, who I'm going to introduce here in a second, are going to be talking about a strategic approach to doing that. Sonny's going to be talking about some software advancements that Wyvern has. I'll be talking about the process of safety risk management, and then really jumping into the solutions side of it to some extent, and help flight departments understand how strategic decisions can be made for implementation. With us, we have Captains Jeff Wofford and Dave Ryan, who are very experienced aviation professionals and pilots and leaders who have implemented UPRT as part of their safety management systems and safety practices for many, many years. And they're here with us today to really add that operational perspective and what they found, what works, what doesn't work, to maybe help you making decisions at your flight department or just for individual safety, depending on the size of your flight operation. So let's go ahead and get started. A little bit about myself. I am the CEO of Aviation Performance Solutions. I'm the current MBAA Safety Chairman as well, which is just a great honor of 80 plus experts from all across the industry working on a lot of different areas of aviation safety. But, you know, my career has been spent after being in the military and the airlines of focusing on upset prevention and recovery training and really how to create resources, tools, strategies for pilots and for flight departments to be able to really overcome this unnecessary risk to air safety, which is loss of control. And we do that through an effective implementation of upset prevention and recovery training. So enough on me. If you want to read more, there's a URL there, apstraining.com/Ransbury. Now, before I introduce our guest today, I do want to remind everybody to go ahead and join up for Session 4. It's coming up in just a couple of hours. If you're watching the event live, please go there. You're going to have a chance to not only interact with our speakers for all those who are available. We got 4 very well-known leading safety auditor organizations that are going to be talking about SMS, UPRT, integration, challenges, solutions, and it's going to be a really great session. So that QR code will work for you, as will the URL. And the great news is, if you're watching the recording, you can still go to the exact same spot and watch the replay on demand. So please don't miss that. Get your phone out, take a picture, pause the video, and go see that. I look forward to seeing you there. And I think our speakers with me here today are all available to show up, I hope. Well, we'll see when we get there. Okay, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our first speaker today, Sonny Bates, who is the CEO of Wyvern. Wyvern is a global leader in elevating safety and security in aviation, and they have established the highest standard in aviation safety and risk management. Now, Sonny is a real go-getter. I'm going to talk a little bit about his military career and then his career since the military. And I think you'll be very impressed in understanding why he is a true expert to be listened to, and that he genuinely cares about the safety of individual pilots and organizations and how to mitigate risk, not just loss of control, but every risk an organization faces both on and off the flight line. So Sonny was in the U.S. Air Force, where he was an instructor, flight examiner, flight commander, aircraft maintenance, quality assurance evaluator, C-5 Galaxy aircraft commander, Boeing C-17 safety program manager, director of operations for the largest air freight operation in the U.S. Department of Defense. His business experience, he's been chief pilot, safety manager, and captain on various business jet aircraft. And he also served, and this is important for today's meeting, he also served as the program director for the International Business Aviation Council, or IBAC, overseeing international standards programs for over 700 operators worldwide. And Sonny's credentials and degrees include FAA airline transport pilot. He has a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics, Master of Science in Management, Master of Philosophy in Management, and a Doctor of Philosophy in Management and Human Potential. He's an MBAA certified aviation manager, certified international safety manager, and IBAC accredited auditor. And Sonny is just a fantastic guy, and we're really going to enjoy his comments and insights today. And he'll be starting off the event once we get all back together. But I got two more introductions for you here that I want to do before we get together and start this session. I think this is really important for you to understand who these experts are and what their perspective brings to the table and to help you. The goal is to see it in some way that relates to you. And I think the diversity of the perspectives between the four of us is going to help a lot with that process. So that's our great wish anyway. Next up, well known to many, Captain Jeff Wofford is the former chairman of the MBAA Safety Committee. In fact, I had the pleasure of being the vice chairman with Jeff for a couple of years. Passionate individual, cares about people, cares about safety, and really loves to share his expertise. He spent 38 years at CommScope flying King Airs and a diversity of Learjet airplanes, where he was chief pilot and director of aviation since 1996, 26 years before he retired there earlier this year. He also led the early adoption of the SMS program and then the later integration of it as MAIL certification or registration. Jeff has a 43-year aviation career with an impressive 14,000 accident-free hours in over 100 airplane types, a number of type ratings, Learjets, all the 2030 series, the 55. He has a Lear 60 type rating, Challenger 300 rating, and LOAs on several military airplanes to include the T-28 Trojan and the T-23 Shooting Star. He's the recipient of the 2013 Eugene Cernas Aviation Safety Stand-Down Award. He's an MBAA certified aviation manager since 2018. He's currently the chair of Standard Aero's Customer Advisory Board, and he's a regular speaker at major events, including Bombardier Safety Stand-Down, MBAA Base, and of course, this event. He's been here several times, both at the summit and also on the Every Pilot in Control Experts Corner that we have from time to time. So that is Jeff. And if anybody knows Jeff, first off, he's a great friend to many of us, certainly well-spoken, and he has no problem sharing his thoughts on any topic. So I'm sure he's going to be a great asset to our meeting today. Let's go ahead now and move on to the last speaker that I want to introduce before we all jump on the session together, and that's Captain Dave Ryan. Captain Ryan is with the Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University right now at the Prescott campus, where he's an assistant professor and executive director of the Robertson Safety Institute. He's also a former chairman of the MBAA Safety Committee, and he spent 3 years as a vice president aviation at MI Aviation Holdings and CEO at Crown Air Aviation. From 1997 to 2008, he was a chief pilot and demonstration pilot at Bombardier Learjet flight operations. And he was also part of the original development team of the Bombardier Safety Stand-Downs, one of the original founding members of the group that organized that. So very, very well accomplished. 1992 to 1997, he was a senior air safety investigator at Textron Aviation and a corporate pilot. Dave has numerous type ratings. He's an ATP and really a long-time advocate of upset prevention and recovery training to counter loss of control in flight. So Dave, like Jeff and Sonny, are great guys. I consider them friends and really true experts in this area of aviation. So finally, with all those introductions complete, we're going to get everybody together now, and let's get everybody in the same room and start chatting, and let's begin the presentation. Well, guys, here we are. I'm really excited to get going on this topic. I think it's going to be a good one and great to have you all here. Let me just get the slides up and we can jump right into it. All right. Here we go. Okay. So today's topic is we're going to be talking about a strategic approach to mitigating loss of control in flight. And kind of the big rocks in our discussion is accomplishing that through UPRT, upset prevention recovery training, and then also advanced software solutions. And so we have quite a lot of information today. We're going to try to go through it relatively quickly. But the good news is we very often have full sessions on any particular topic. And if we do, we're going to point you there to learn more about it so that we can get through on our messaging today. So for the agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about statistics, have a conversation on that. Then we're going to really articulate what we mean by strategic loss of control and flight mitigation, because we need to put some scope around that to truly talk about how we accomplish that from a practical standpoint. Sunny's going to take us through a root cause analysis. I'll briefly go through a loss of control risk assessment, but point everybody to an expanded live event on demand you can go to learn more about it. And then we're going to have a real world example of how modern UPRT would be to combat an event that happens far too often, which is circle to land. And then the operational implementation insights, we have Jeff and Dave here to give their perspective, to insert themselves and join in the discussion at any point. And the idea today is to have a conversation together and end with enough time to have a Q&A. And today we're very happy to stay. If there's questions that take us beyond the hour, we'll stay until we run out of questions or we get to a total of 90 minutes, whichever happens first. So that'll be our plan on this topic. So loss of control in flight. Here's the typical air carrier. In fact, this is 2012 to 2021. We can see that loss of control at the air carrier level represents nearly half of all fatal fatalities at 44%. But very often what gets missed is, what does it look like in the other parts of aviation? Well, according to the NTSB, we can see here in the United States alone, corporate, Part 135, instructional and personal aviation, you can see that loss of control in flight still dominates those areas. So it's not just airline, it's not just general aviation, it's all across fixed wing aviation that loss of control in flight is a big issue, which probably implies that it may be something fundamentally absent in our training that needs to be addressed, and that is the function and role of UPRT. So stop listening to me now. I've been going on the introductions, and now the first part of this, let's have a conversation. And I just wanted to have a couple points here for us to chat about, to get everybody engaged and then get us ready for the upcoming conversation. So why don't we start with you, Jeff, and then Dave, and then over to Sunny so we've just seen some stats on how significant loss of control is, but from a flight department standpoint, decision maker standpoint, safety manager standpoint, is loss of control something that they should be really worried about, and how significant it is to those type of operations? Why don't we start with you, Jeff?
Well, I don't know if worry is the right word. I think one thing is have to be aware of it. I think that when you look at statistics, when you look at the last few years of the different accidents we've had, obviously loss of control in flight is still a big problem. And so I think it's definitely something we've got to have out in front of us. We've got to take a look at it. It's like anything else. If, once we identify a hazard and we look at the risk associated with it, we've got to come up with mitigating strategies. And, so many times we don't spend enough time talking about loss control when we're going through recurrent training or even initials. There's so much things that have to be put together during a recurrent that there's very little time to add stuff to it. And so we've got to make sure that we come up with a method that allows us to identify ways to address this issue. And in many times, this is going to another provider to do specific upset prevention and recovery training.
Cool. Dave, your thoughts to add to that or compliment?
Yeah. Jeff makes great points. I look at it also through the lens of being prepared. We constantly talk about not training to minimums. We talk about training to above minimums. And this is just one of those scenarios that is out there that eventually you're going to run into. And if you're not prepared, you're seeing it for the first time as you go live and you haven't done the training, then it's not a great situation to be in. So, the challenge is raising your training minimums, doing more than what is required to, address and focus on really being prepared for the situation.
Yeah, I mean, we often talk about the been there, seen that value, right? Is that having had the training and not being there the first time with your family on board at night, in an airplane upset. And so there's a lot of, psychophysiological factors associated with that as well. So Sunny, over to you. What are your thoughts to add to these gentlemen's great insights?
Well, a thought I just had was they say in real estate, you should invest in it because they're not making more of it. And, this thing is airspace is the same way. We have a certain finite amount of airspace that we fly in around the world, but yet we keep pumping more jets and other aircraft into that space. And with that, you have a higher risk of wake turbulence. And so from a safety provider's point of view, we see so many cases, and I have been a passenger on a jet airliner in the past 5 years where we hit wake turbulence on final in Atlanta, and I felt like we came close to losing the aircraft. So I think the risk goes up as time goes on, really, with regard specifically to wake turbulence.
Cool. Great. Okay, guys, nicely done. So it's interestingly, for anybody who missed the previous presentation in session 1 that's either just completed or just completing right now, is Delta Airlines presented a demonstrated reduction in the occurrence of airplane upsets of 50% directly as a result of their implementation of a robust UPRT program. And so what does that mean? If the industry is able to demonstrate that substantial of a reduction, what are the implications of that? I know it's kind of a wide open question, but why don't we just go back? There's no order required. Why don't we start with you, Jeff, and just jump in as anybody has thoughts on that?
Well, I think with what Delta's demonstrated is really important. They're showing that by making pilots aware of UPRT, that you can actually impact change. You can. It's like anything else. If you don't know about it, you don't know to try to prevent it. I don't know. I'm trying to figure the best way to put it into words. It's like going swimming and expecting to go swimming with dolphins, discover you're swimming with sharks. You want to be prepared. And so I think that one of the things we run across is the fact that in so many cases, a lot of people look at it from the standpoint, well, we've never needed to do this in the past. Well, in this case, actually, we have needed to do it in the past. The records and all the accident statistics show that. And so with what Delta's done, they've proven through training that you can reduce these events and you can increase the awareness of the potential for these events by introducing the pilots to this and doing it on a refresher basis. So I think this is an important step, and it proves the mindset behind UPRT.
Awesome. Dave, thoughts?
Yeah, first of all, when I saw this last week, I was amazed that this is a perfect example of the use of data and safety data. They did an amazing job to leverage, I think it was 10 years of safety data to produce a result, right? And the exciting part is that, I've been training UPRT since 1996, various vendors, but it is amazing that it's starting to show the results, right? And this is an amazing result. And it's something that is achievable by any department, any airline. And so this is a great example. Kudos to Delta for being the role model. And I'm excited to see other data show as we progress.
Yeah, so if anybody didn't see that first session, Captain Brian Sims, the UPRT program lead, essentially gives a master's level class on risk management and how an airline like that analyzes risk on 5 years, 5 million flights. And I think that their mitigations that they presented are really interesting as well. So, Sonny, over to you for final thoughts on this topic.
Yeah, I think I'll keep it simple, maybe a little bit fun too. We use the expression ETA in aviation. And when I heard what Jeff and Dave were just saying there, I think ETA, education, training, and awareness, the power of those things, to have this kind of outcome with Delta. So, yeah.
Cool. Great. Okay, guys, I'm just going to go to the next bullet, but given the time, I think we're going to bypass it. It talks about how does upset recovery contribute to upset prevention. I think that we're in our example at the end that we're going to talk about the circled land. I think it gives a very practical representation of how awareness of recovery and the escalation can lead to improved awareness and prevention. So just to get on with the meat of the presentation, let's just go ahead and move right into it. So what do we mean by strategic loss of control mitigation? Well, Sonny, you're the expert in this area, and I would just present here that mitigating any risk really should be part of an SMS following the 4 components of SMS, and then mitigating the risk should follow the risk management process of hazard identification, risk assessment, risk mitigation, and acceptance. It seems to me that the strategic approach to it is already built into the SMS system. Do you want to comment on that a little bit? If you don't agree, certainly say so.
Well, I think I just have to agree. I mean, you've done such a good job putting these slides together, and the structure there is perfect. Yeah, it's, SMS, every professional operator should have an SMS, and therefore SMS have these four components. But when you get into the risk management process, that's where things can get kind of complex and convoluted, actually. And I think that's what we're going to spend some time trying to clarify during this session together. But, we'll really get into the safety risk assessment, but you really don't jump into assessing. You have to do some analysis. First, you have to be aware of the risk, and then analyze that risk, and then you can assess the risk. And once you've done those three things, then you can get into mitigating.
Cool. Absolutely. Guys, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think real quick, one thing I wanted to add is that I think one thing we have to take into consideration is that when we talk about UPRT, especially when we talk about the circle of land issues, I think one of the problems we have in training is we don't put enough focus on, the hazards and identifying the risks in this particular procedure. And so, pilots can take sort of a laissez-faire attitude toward it. We do it in the simulator. We don't have to do it that much in real life. And so when they're presented with a real life circle of land or an event that could lead up to loss control in flight, they're not really well prepared for it. And so I think that getting people used to using the SMS format and to identify hazards and risk mitigation strategies is essential. And the biggest thing is bringing out this awareness.
Cool. Great. Dave, anything to add on that?
No, I would totally agree with Jeff. This is really a kind of a comprehensive and complementary attack at this whole subject with knowledge-based, skill-based, and we can talk about that here in a bit.
Yeah, and I think the beauty is there's nothing unique about the strategic approach, right? You need to follow the SMS principles, but drilling in on loss of control is a little bit of a different animal in the risk assessment phase. So what are the strategic objectives? We can see, well, of course, to reduce the occurrence of upsets, just like Delta accomplished, but also, should it proceed into the upset, is to reduce fatal loss control outcomes. But a robust UPRT program to further mitigate loss of control really needs to give tools that pilots use on every single flight. Increase the situational awareness, their resilience, the manual flight operation proficiency, aeronautical decision making, threat and error management. You'll find that a comprehensive UPRT program has tremendous amount of additional benefits beyond just eliminating the occurrence of upset and loss of control. It increases the capability of the pilot across the board. And a great example is we train about 500 students a year. And what we find is after they leave our program, the reride rate almost drops to zero because of their increased flight envelope awareness, decision-making, their comfort in the airplane, for example. So it's really exciting in that respect. So it's more than just preventing airplane upsets from occurring. It's enhancing the overall pilot. Guys, any comments on that before we move on?
Yeah, I would totally, BJ, agree with all of that. I think that one of the hidden or not focused on benefits from this upset training, and I'm talking about the whole program, awareness, prevention, and recovery, is the benefits of skill development, confidence building, in an age where we're very reliant on automation. Some manual flying skills are highlighted in this, and I think it's just an overall tool to increase situational awareness, which I know you're going to be talking about in the next part. So all these benefits are very important, other than just mitigating the risk for upset.
Yeah, and I think to Dave's point, the next session, session 3 by Shane Tobin from Australia, is going to talk about the human factors, situational awareness, and a lot of the medical, psychophysiological benefits of UPRT to be more effective in crisis. So thanks for bringing that up, Dave. Anybody else? Jeff, were you going to say something there? Did I step on you?
No, that's yeah. Real quick, when we introduced UPRT into our operation in 2006. One of the first things we discovered was I had a couple of the guys had never been upside down. They had never experienced any flying outside of the normal envelope. And so after they got back from UPRT, they had a much different view of how to fly the airplane. And so I think one of the things we've touched on briefly is the fact that it does improve manual handling skills. And I think one of the issues we've had, really since early 2000, we focused on the technology in the airplane, and we focused a little less on the manual handling skills. And I think the one thing that UPRT does is it does get you back into the cockpit, manually flying the airplane and learning how to fly the airplane outside of that normal envelope. And I think that's essential into making us better.
Cool. Great. Well said, Jeff. Sonny, anything here? Are you ready to move on?
No, we're good. Ready to move on.
All right. Well, you're up, Sonny. So Sonny and I were, as Wyvern and APS, we're here to talk about the high-level perspective on loss of control. We're not here to promote our products. We just want to give our perspective on risk mitigation and solutions that exist in the industry. So, Sonny, why don't you tell us about Wyvern and take us through your root cause analysis?
All right. Happy to, BJ. Thanks. Just real quick, our mission at Wyvern is to elevate aviation safety around the world. And with that, we connected to our vision that every operator has an effective SMS, which is what we're expanding on today. What does that mean to have an effective SMS? And we do all this enshrouded with our core values of professionalism and innovation and relationships. And it's really, I would like to just spend a few seconds on that. I think when you were talking about the benefits of UPRT outside just the recovery maneuver and things like that, and even awareness, I think you're actually also promoting a professional approach to addressing risk in general. And if you can imagine every professional operator on this planet looking at all risks like runway excursion, fuel contamination, whatever the risk might be, with the same kind of professionalism that is being applied here, I think the whole aviation industry would benefit from that mindset. So my hat's off to everybody that participates in these kind of forums to promote professional risk management. And finally, we have promises at Wyvern to deliver in a way that meets the customer's expectations. And I guess the promise I always put out there, you don't have to be a client or customer of Wyvern to have that relationship with us. We're here to help everybody. So we'd love to have the conversation. So let's just jump into it. We're talking about root cause analysis right now with a loss of control in-flight example, and specifically related to a circling maneuver. So let's go to that next slide. When you look at root cause analysis, root cause is that factor that really causes a problem. And this is a picture from the American Society for Quality. And the problem itself is the tree trunk. And these causes are the roots underneath, and the symptoms are up in the branches of the tree. And it's kind of interesting when you flip this on its side, if you would, BJ, it really is a bow tie analysis where you have these threats on the left causing a problem, and this problem could manifest itself into these different symptoms. And personally, I really favor the bow tie analysis, but there are so many ways to analyze things that I'll go through more simplistic forms coming up here. For example, so in a typical 5 whys approach, which most aviation professionals have heard of 5 whys, let's say you have a scenario where a crew experiences an approach to stall indication during a circling maneuver. Well, the investigator or analyst would say, well, why did that happen? Well, the answer would be something like, well, we overshot final, and we overbanked to get the airplane around, and we went beyond SOP limits for bank angle. Well, why did you do that? Would be the next question. Well, kind of a lack of awareness of really the risk involved with this particular circling maneuver. We weren't really prepared for it because of that lack of awareness. We didn't plan. We didn't really brief it thoroughly. And really, we didn't feel like our confidence level was there because we always practiced the circling maneuver in the simulator at JFK, and it's canned. And so we don't really feel competent and proficient at circling maneuvers anyway. And even as a team, we don't really practice in the simulator as a team. I'm always practicing with a contract pilot or maybe a loaner pilot somewhere. So I don't really get to work on circling maneuvers in the simulator like I should. Okay, well, why is that? When you start breaking this down, well, we do have deficiencies in our tools because our flight risk assessment tools maybe don't really get into the actual risks associated with circling approaches, even though it might be a cursory line item. Or maybe our briefing tools aren't really designed well for the circling maneuver. It might be just a generic, hey, we're going to do this approach, and it's really assuming a straight-in approach with a missed approach. without really considering the circling attributes. And then finally, the deficiencies in the training program, as I may have already elaborated on. Well, then why is that? Well, we're looking at the training and tools do not really adequately, address circling risks. And specific, that's where we're getting at. And finally, well, then why is that? And here's the drum roll. If you do 5 whys appropriately, you're going to keep asking why until you get to the management level. Because ultimately, your top leadership gets that top leadership pay to be ultimately accountable for the operation. And so the management really needs to have specific insight into risks, such as circling maneuvers or higher risk approaches, and all the training that goes into that and all the tools that support the crews out there to mitigate these risks and be aware of these risks. So that's an example of 5 whys, but typically 5 whys is enough to get you information to bring to the table for a better analysis of the situation. And one of the best analysis, and there's many different analyses if you go through a root cause analysis course. One great one is the barrier analysis, which is the Swiss cheese model. And you start off going right to left, you'll end up at the management level, but you start off by, well, did we follow all the regulations? In this case, maybe, but they did admit that they overbanked beyond, we'll say, airplane flight manual limits, which is technically a regulatory deviation. The training program we already talked about, it helps you look at the training program a little bit more depth when you look at the barrier analysis. We have LTA. When you see the term LTA in quality, it means less than adequate. So less than adequate training related to the circling maneuvers in general, briefing the circling approach, CRM for the circling approach, and RA, we're talking about risk awareness. Well, technology. Now, this is where the barrier analysis helps beyond the 5 whys. Well, we haven't really talked about technology. Did that come into play? Well, in this case, it did. Because when it was, let's say in this case, it was an older model airplane like a G4SP, and you look at the MEL, and you're allowed to take off, management-wise, can allow that airplane to go without a Mode 6 EGPWS, which would give you the bank angle warning. Mm-hmm. Well, in this case, that was MEL, so they didn't get the bank angle warning. And then we look at human factors. Well, in human factors, we had less than adequate risk awareness. We had less than adequate planning, briefing, and competence. Well, what was a precursor to that human performance or lack thereof? We look at the workplace. And in the workplace, we're looking at, well, we have higher risk instrument approach procedures. That's the IAPS that are being flown. And really, they're just being treated like, it's just another approach. But it's actually a higher risk procedure that should be given the due diligence in the planning and preparation for it. Less than adequate CRM, we're already looking at that, tools. So the barrier analysis, you can see it's like a different way to look at it versus the 5 whys to get a little bit more granularity in the holes and these barriers that could have prevented the situation in the first place. And so you finally get to the barrier analysis at the organization or management level, where it identifies that management needs to provide better guidance, better training, better MEL process, maybe better tools for risk awareness and risk assessment, and addressing higher risk instrument approach procedures. So that's a barrier analysis. But still, fundamentally, this is not what we do in the operations. These are still theoretical models. Now, the 5 whys is like on the fly, operational. Barrier analysis is kind of more like academic classroom. What are you really going to do when you sit down in your organization and say, what happened here? Well, you're going to go into your SMS software. And I say here that, RA cubed is risk awareness, risk analysis, and risk assessment. So typical SMS, you'll go in here and say, well, we overbanked and we got, the stick shaker during that circling approach. But we recovered and we landed uneventful, but we put in the SMS anyway. Your traditional SMS software will give you this kind of look. However, your contemporary SMS software packages will allow you to branch out and say, well, what could have happened? Well, what could have happened? We could have got an actual stall warning. What if you're doing that circling maneuver, you overbank and pull, and you get the stick pusher? I mean, now you got a handful of airplane that if you have ever been in the simulator with that is no fun. Or you could have ended up in the loss control in flight and actually had to recover the airplane with those procedures used there. And I just want to point out that your software should allow you to analyze the risks associated with each of those potential outcomes. But also, from the event you put in there, like you overbanked and you had this event, you should be able to go to the left and say, well, what were precursors to that? What fed into this? And so we can see there that the EGPWS was MBL'd and all these other things that happened to include inadequate risk analysis. These are all precursors to that moment, which I call an undesired state. And as you can work back in your SMS software, this is just like the barrier analysis or 5 whys on steroids. You're not done until you reach that management level. Like, hey, what should management have done to prevent these things? Do we have adequate guidance? Do we have adequate tools? Do we have adequate training programs in place? So your SMS software should allow you to dig into these things methodically without you have to remember the theoretics of the barrier analysis, the theoretics of 5 whys. Your software just facilitates this and enables you to do this by asking you questions. And also, this is news you can use. Almost every SMS software package out there today, I would imagine, has artificial intelligence built into it because it's very expensive to do that. The API is easy. So we do that for our software, and it allows the analyst to say, well, what else? Am I missing anything? And just push the button, and AI will spit out some other considerations for you that you might not be thinking about. Cool. So that's pretty much it, BJ. I want to share those insights with you with regard to root cause analysis and how today's modern software, and there's many choices out there that you could use. They should help you break down the event like this.
I love it. So I'm curious, guys, as being Vice President Flight Operations, Director Operations, Chief Pilot, I'm kind of curious what Jeff and Dave have to say about the role of those positions to get management to support the needs of the flight department. Is there anything you guys want to talk about there? Because at the end of the day, management may not know the mitigations or what the flight department needs to be able to accomplish, this implementation that Sonny outlined. Dave, do you want to start with you? Then maybe Jeff, then we'll move on.
Yeah, this is a great example of using a specific scenario or training scenario to illustrate risk management and going through the exercise and why we do it. Not just for upset training, but for overall SMS support, right? From your management who signs the policy every couple of years or however often you update it. So this is a great example on how to break that down.
Jeff, thoughts?
Yeah, so I think, it'd be very seldom that the senior leadership of the company would understand the challenges posed in an aviation department. What they're looking at is the expense, the operational capabilities and things like that. So it's up to the director or chief pilot to get with the C-suite and make sure they understand what this is all about, to make sure they understand the ideas of, hazard identification, risk mitigation. But the important part of it is developing culture. Without a safety culture, none of this works. And so one of the things we've got to do to develop an efficient safety program is get our management to understand what we're trying to do and give them examples. We've got to be able to explain to them why this is important, what this, what the impact of this could be. And I mean, it's one of these things, if you looked at it, to put it in perspective, what if you only went out and practiced an ILS approach when you thought you might need to? You're not always going to fly in clear blue skies, but so you never practice ILS and then one day you really need it and it's not there. So these skills are things that are perishable. They're things that need to be looked at. And for a lot of people, they've never been exposed to them. So this is critical, and having this understanding with your senior leadership is essential.
Great, guys. Sonny, thank you for that. That was excellent. What a great discussion topic. I think it puts a great perspective on what we're talking about here, which is an implementation of risk management that we're presenting. So let's go ahead and jump in. So very briefly, Aviation Performance Solutions, we help pilots bring everyone home safely, and our brand promise is every pilot trained in control all the time. And we do partner with safety champions just like Wyvern to accelerate the adoption of life-saving upset training. And so it's great to be here with Wyvern today accomplishing that. And many of our other partners are also participating. One thing I wanted to bring up here is we've been alluding to previous and next sessions. And so this QR code, if you follow that, it'll take you to a summary where you can actually look and see session 1, 2, 3, and 4 and jump into those to have a look at those. So if you're watching live, certainly go register for the next events. The next one, session 3, is going to be talking a lot of the human factors. And then if you haven't seen session 1 that just happened with Brian Sims and Captain Bennett's, then, jump on that. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the loss of control and flight risk assessment process. Now, the reason I have this QR code up is to give me some license and going pretty quickly through this process. And so it's an in-depth topic that really you need to take time to listen and think about it. So this QR code will take you to a full hour session just on the process that I'm going to go through here. It includes myself and auditors. In fact, I think Sunny was part of that conversation as well about how to really do a deep dive on it. So with that in mind, with the license to go quickly, I'm going to go through this relatively succinctly. But if you need more information, just scroll the video back, get this QR code, and then go study on that, then move forward. Okay, so a typical risk assessment or risk matrix looks like this. It's organized for the risk. In this particular case, it's a loss of control risk, and it's defined by severity along the top or the columns and probability along the left or the rows. And so the idea behind that is to determine what is the likely severity of loss of control in flight. Well, it's almost always catastrophic. And so we have column A. Well, where do we exist on the left side in probability? So we take a look at the definitions by ICAO. This is now a resource out of ICAO Doc 9859. You see remote is defined as unlikely to occur but possible, has occurred rarely. And I think we saw that in our initial discussion of statistics. The next one down, though, is very unlikely to occur, not known to have occurred. And I think that's probably not a great place to land because of the fact that it has occurred and it's so rare. Just because it hasn't occurred to you doesn't mean it couldn't. Mm-hmm. So that's something to think about. Then the very bottom one, almost inconceivable the event will occur. So the most likely definition is this. Now, this particular color spectrum from red, yellow, and green is based on the safety risk profile of the organization. The organization defines what its safety risk tolerance is, but this is the standard one out of ICAO. So in this particular case, we can see that 3A is red, which is an intolerable risk, and that implies that the risk needs to be mitigated or the operation terminated. So the intent for an organization is to understand where the existing risk is, and they take action to mitigate it. And that's what upset prevention and recovery training can do. Depending on what you do and the extent of it, you can mitigate it a little bit or a lot. You can get into the orange region, which is a tolerable risk, or a management can make a decision to move forward and accept that risk or further mitigate it into an acceptable risk. But again, the flight department of the operation determines its safety risk tolerance. So that just gives you an idea of the purpose and intent of risk management is to get it to a lower likelihood, which can be probability and severity. Now, we often think about reducing probability as prevention training or reducing probability as simulator training. And we think very often reducing severity as on-aircraft training or recovery training. While that is not necessarily an incorrect understanding of it, the reality is that you both accomplish a little bit of each other, but most importantly, you need both prevention and recovery training and simulation and on-aircraft training to reliably be able to go down that diagonal to reduce the threat of loss of control in flight. The problem going to the right on severity is that the human factors escalate very dramatically in a real-world airplane upset. Should you get exposed to a real upset, it's possible to have the skills but be psychophysiologically impaired to be able to get access to them. So it's really, really important to understand that it's a combination of on-aircraft simulation and academic training to give you that robust capability in a crisis. So very quickly, to understand the hazard identification, so we looked at a risk assessment. We determined that we're not in a good place. So the very first step of the safety management process is hazard identification. So this model is great in showing all the hazards or causes of loss of control on left to determine, can we eliminate the cause? Well, we can likely eliminate a couple. For example, we'll never go flying if there's any weather. We can eliminate thunderstorm. But the reality is you start going down the list, you can't always eliminate flight instrument problem or auto flight problem or flight control problem or distraction problem or spatial disorientation problem. So the reality is when it comes to loss of control, you can't eliminate all the hazards, so you have to mitigate the risk. And so the industry understanding that has many layers of mitigation that will look familiar. But the point is here is those layers of mitigation have a demonstrated outcome of loss of control being the number one threat to air safety. So let's just take an example of a auto flight system issue that propagates its way through the funnel that makes its way through the layers of mitigation. The common question is, well, how did that happen? Well, the reality is there's a lot going on the flight deck, and sometimes they make it through, very, very rarely, but they do. And the industry back in 2014 decided to implement a more robust implementation to further enhance these layers of mitigation, and it's called upset prevention and recovery training in accordance with ICAO Doc 111. It's designed not only to have more capability in the upset, but to really embolden and enhance all the layers of mitigation leading up to that for all the reasons that we have talked about. So with that, the intent of risk mitigation is to do exactly that, to give the training competencies and capabilities in place for pilots to be able to understand, prevent, and recognize situations in developing. Because as everybody in this call will agree, and we can probably go through that in a minute, is the very best recovery is never being there in the first place. And I think that's the real power of the outcomes that Delta is presenting. If you're never actually exposed to the airplane upset and you've reduced it by 50%, you have actually, no kidding, reduced the risk of loss of control by 50% as a minimum, not even considering recovery capability. So real quick, I know we want to wrap up here in about 5 to 10 minutes. A comprehensive implementation of UPRT is represented by this model called the Every Pilot in Control Solution Standard. And the reason why I bring it up is because it's a freely available model to any organization wanting to implement effective UPRT. But what it does is gives perspective on what really matters. Very often, providers will talk about, I have the best airplane, I have the best instructor, my on-aircraft program is the silver bullet, it solves everything. Well, the reality of it is an effective UPRT program requires the optimization of all pieces of the pie. You need elite instructors, you need an integrated program, academic on-aircraft simulation, you have to have the intensity of training, the right amount of training for long enough to establish skills, implementing not just regulatory minimums, but best practices, and having the right platform to do the job, including a robust initial program, the outer ring, and recurrent program to assure every pilot in control in the center. So very briefly, what it means is that it's taking the existing system on the right, where every pilot in the world is carrying around a certain level of competency on awareness, prevention, and recovery from airplane upsets, but very quickly they can get into a loss of control condition, which defined by ICAO is the manifestation of extreme deviation from the intended flight path. So the importance of implementing an effective EPIC S2 program is now to take that competency on the right and expand it in all directions. Increased awareness, increased prevention, increased recognition, and increased recovery. And very often we think about UPRT as being an increase on the right side of it to handle more severe situations. And while that is true, the real power of an effective UPRT program is really the increase in awareness and prevention. That is the hallmark of an effective program, is that's the focus. While recovery training helps with awareness and prevention, operationally, it's recognizing and avoiding situations in the first place. So let me just pause there, guys, for a minute before we jump into the example, and then I'll go through a circle land example. Let me just pause there. Let's start with you, Jeff. Anything to comment on that very, very quick risk analysis to get us to this point to have an example conversation?
Yeah, a couple things. One is when you look at this risk analysis, I think it's great. And I think that, most people are trying to use at least some kind of FRAT nowadays. But I think the key to it is when you're going to do a flight risk assessment, you really want to do it for real, not just doing it to check a block. And then when you're doing something out of the ordinary, like a circling approach, that really requires an additional assessment and at least, and especially a good briefing before you start your descent. And in switching gears to the EPIC program, I think one of the things I wanted to point out is that you hit the nail on the head in that there is no one single silver bullet. It requires several things. One, and I think probably the most important, is having a qualified instructor, somebody that knows how to present this material in an effective way and understand what they're talking about. You can't just go read an article and go in and jump in and start doing effect or teach. effective UPRT. And then the idea of integrating this with not only with simulator but on aircraft is essential. With a simulator, you can get a feel for it, and you can learn to understand the techniques. And then when you get in the airplane, you get the kinesthetic feel. You feel the G's, and you're looking at what's really happening, and nothing can replace that. And so by building a program that has effective instructors, an effective simulator program, and effective on aircraft training, produces that silver bullet, and it can make a big difference.
Awesome, Jeff. Dave, anything to add to that?
No, I think it's important to realize that this is a comprehensive and kind of complementary approach, right? I always think of this learning process with upset recovery is skill-based training supported by a huge amount of knowledge-based training. It is key to understand what you're getting into and then practice it and then go out and do it on wing. On wing is really the solidifier of it all.
Great, Dave. Sonny, anything to add there?
Well, just that, on any given week, thousands of these safety report cards are ran on air charter operators. They're called Wyvern pass reports, and they break down a pilot's experience levels to see if they meet the standard for that particular trip. And BJ approached me some years ago, actually, and said, is there a way that pilots can be given credit for this kind of training? And the more we looked at it at Wyvern, we said, this makes sense. We've been looking for an opportunity to recognize pilots, not just for the amount of flying experience they have, but the quality of their training and how that quality training minimizes risk. But then we had to define that quality training. And so Wyvern and APS worked together to look at international standards, professional codes of practice in the industry to mitigate these risks related to loss of control in flight. And together with this standard, there now is a document that any operator can use if they want to set up shop and be a UPRT provider. They should meet these standards. And if they do, then Wyvern will recognize them with their pilots to allow that consideration to reduce those pilot hours to meet those pass reports, is what we call them, for that specific flight. I know I said a lot there. I don't know if I was too convoluted, but it's a real meaningful approach to managing risk, not just quantitatively, but qualitatively.
I think that's great, Sonny. I mean, Wyvern is progressive anyway, but being progressive in this area of mitigating risk through quality training, such as Epic S2, a big thank you for that, for, partnering on that initiative to set an industry standard that could be adopted by anybody. And now we're seeing the users of that, like Delta Airlines and, we see Global Airways in the previous presentation, USAIG Insurance Organization, Star Aviation Insurance are all understanding the importance of mitigating the risk of loss of control in flight, not just because of loss of control, but for all the reasons we talked about with increased competency, awareness, and resilience across the board. So we could talk about that forever and ever. Okay, let's jump into an example, guys. I see that, our intent to go quickly is always good because we go long. So let's just continue the conversation here just to get through the example because I think it's important. And again, everybody who's on the call, we are going to extend the Q&A to respond to questions beyond the 1 hour as needed. So thank you for listening. And I think the conversation has been really powerful to this point. So let me just go ahead and take you through this example of a circle to land because Truckee accident, Teterboro accident, there's many, many accidents associated with the traffic pattern. In this particular case, a skidded turn traffic pattern stall. So that gives me an opportunity to talk about how effective UPRT can prepare a pilot to be aware of, recognize, and prevent the situation from occurring in the first place. So this is a glass cockpit representation from a Garmin product of a circle to land approach. And the un-UPRT trained pilot would look at this and say, you know what, our speed is good. Stall speed in this configuration is about 75 knots. Angle of attack is lower than L/D max, represented by the green dot. I'm good. I got plenty of margin. The problem is a UPRT trained, a modern UPRT trained pilot would look at this situation and immediately recognize it's a disaster underway. They immediately go to the coordination. Ball is on the high wing side. That's a skidded turn traffic pattern stall. If I stall, it's going to roll towards the ground or to the left. I have energy depleting. You can see the magenta bar where the speed is decreasing, and that's only going to accelerate in its reduction as we continue this energy depleting cross-controlled turn. But the bigger concern is, while a skidded turn traffic pattern stall is recoverable, if we take a look at the altitude of 3,200 feet with a field elevation of 2,500 feet, we have about 700 feet of altitude to be able to miss the ground. And I will tell you right now, in a circle to land approach, in this particular situation, in a skidded turn traffic pattern stall, there likely is not a recovery phase. And what I mean by that, if you don't recognize and prevent it, and you continue this process to the point where the airplane departs and rolls over, I'm going to show you a video in a minute where I'm actually flying. As soon as it breaks, knowing exactly what's going on, when it's coming with a near ideal recovery, takes me over 600 feet of altitude to recover a jet airplane. And that's an aerobatic jet airplane, let alone being a Citation or Gulfstream or a bigger airplane with a delay in response, okay? So really important to understand the yellow is the traditional perspective. The red is the enhanced perspective through UPRT training. And so that's a great example of how recovery training and awareness and prevention training can really get pilots in a position of seeing this coming, because as soon as they recognize the indicators, what do? As a minimum, get the coordinated flight, but probably as the top priority, if this is developed at all, is initiate the go around and get out of there. This is a very, very dire situation. So I'm going to run a video here. This is, you can see we've been doing this for a long time. This video is from 2016. This is flying in a S-211 jet airplane. And what it's going to be is a circle to land. Now, you see the little orange block on the top. The video is going to show the awareness, prevention, and recovery phase. Now, in the awareness phase, it should be the phase at which the pilot is fully trained in knowing what to look for when things are going wrong. When you see the prevention icon pop up, it means control inputs are incorrect. The scenario is presenting itself to the pilot through training. They should recognize it immediately and get out of there. When it turns red and goes to recovery, that's the recovery, which is recoverable, but it may not matter who's flying the airplane at that point because there may not be enough time or altitude to miss the ground. So let's go ahead and we'll play the video. I'm going to play it full screen, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about it here. So here we go.
We're now a scenario. We're on a circle to land approach. All right, we're on the downwind, about to turn base. We're going to configure 148 gear down. 145 flaps, we're going to go to takeoff. We're going to stay there for maneuvering. And I got the power set at about 65%, which is a pretty normal approach power setting. And I'm going to start my turn, coordinated turn about 30 degrees of bank. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start feeding in the bottom rudder. Okay, now put your hands on the controls with me. Okay. Watch how the ailerons have to go way to the right. Can you see that? Yep. We're heavy inside rudder, balls to the high wing. We're tightening our turn. The real world we want out of here right now. Would you agree? Yeah. Here we go. Let's go right into it. Recover. Push. Roll. Power. Move. There's that inertia. Really bringing the nose up. Pitch, power set. Positive rate, gear up. 137 flaps are coming up. Gears up, flaps up, speed brakes in, trim set, recovery's complete.
Okay, guys. Any comments on that? Maybe Jeff and Dave, you've been through the programs before that address this particular scenario. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing to add is the fact that they were expecting it. And so that was a nice recovery. Imagine the person that's not been exposed to this, having this happen and trying to work his way through the recovery. That's an essential difference. And so it's a great example of what you can do with the training. And also you can extrapolate from that what it would be like without the training.
Cool. Dave, anything to add?
Yeah, not only were they ready for it, they prepared it, right? So, I mean, that's the ultimate setup right there. So now take the startle factor, uneducated, et cetera, and you're probably going to at least triple that that recovery. So this is a scenario, the circle to land scenario is one that you really have to look for. So your circling of each of the data points, BJ, was key because this is hidden, right? You got a little bit of altitude left. The ball is not something that some of us look at all the time, but the rest of the parameters look pretty good, right? So you kind of get lured into it. So seeing it in training, very important.
Well, it's interesting in the next presentation, Shane Tobin, which we talk about a lot as well, is that pilots often come and say, you know what, I've never been anywhere near loss of control in flight. And they leave the program and like, oh my gosh, I've been putting myself at risk all the time and had no idea. Holy cow, I'm so happy to be alive. Thank you, for the training. And that's I'm not talking about APS, but any robust UPRT program builds a situational awareness of pilots where they have no idea how close to catastrophe they have been. And then they leave the program just from a situational awareness standpoint, best training they've ever had for that reason. Sonny, anything to add to that?
Kind of goes back to what Jeff was saying earlier about swimming with sharks. I grew up in the Midwest and water skiing and swimming in the lakes. And I think the last time I maybe swam in a lake was I put on some goggles and I was swimming underwater and I saw different snakes swimming around with me. And I came out of that water and got back in the boat. And I asked people, I said,
end of water skiing career.
Are they a chance those are poisonous? But anyway, we do these maneuvers and we don't know how close to the hazards we are. And so I think your training program, the UPRT, wakens people up and they become more vigilant on how close really danger is.
Right. And and one thing I'll add that we're going to go to questions. I know we're over time here already, guys, but let's circle back to the escalation spectrum, right? So as the pilot being put in that circle to land, you got to think about at top of descent when you're briefing the approach. You have to have the training to understand that a circle to land is a very high risk flight condition. Is when you're briefing the approach, what's the most threatening thing that can happen to us? Well, it's probably going to be an uncoordinated skidded turn in the circle to land. So brief what it is. What are we going to take action on? And probably the most important one, do we really need to go do this? So through planning, aeronautical decision-making, we can interrupt a lot of these unnecessary fatal accidents right in the planning stage or decision stage to execute something we know to be hazardous. So with that, guys, what we're going to do now is we're going to transition to questions. Before we do that, any final comments from anybody? Or are you just excited to get to the group that's online with us today?
BJ, I think it's important to Jeff brought up a great point. This entire skill set, knowledge-based, skill-based, is perishable. It's a sport. You got to practice, right? If you're going to move down the severity chain, you can do it in an initial over to one block, but you're going to also have to do refreshers and recurrence to move to further blocks. So don't think you're just going to sweep it over in an initial and forget about it. So it's got to be practiced.
Love it. Well said, Dave. Anybody else, any comments before we have the questions?
I think we're good.
All right, guys. Well, let's go ahead and transition to questions. And I'm looking forward to having a great interaction with everybody. We will extend the session today as long as questions are there or we get to the 90-minute point. So we'll see you on the other side. So one thing, guys, I neglected to do was to mention where everybody's from around the world. If you take a look over in the comments, we're actually seeing folks from Uganda, Germany, Mexico, Serbia, United States, Canada. Just really, really exciting to see that. So it truly is a global event. And just so everybody's aware, in the control room here, we do see questions coming in, not only on LinkedIn, but also Facebook and Twitter, and looks like YouTube as well. So that's great. So guys, so Dave, while we're waiting on questions, and I see a few here already, which are great. One thing you had mentioned, Dave, is that you see as UPRT as a skill-based solution that has a huge amount of academic knowledge. And I'm sure at Embry-Riddle, you get a really good perspective on that as well. Are you seeing that not only just for UPRT or loss of control mitigation, are you now a even deeper believer in the importance of academic preparation to improve the ability for pilots to be able to get as much out of practical training as they can? Or maybe I'm saying something you don't agree with. Do you want to jump on that one?
No, knowledge-based training is the key foundation to all of this, right? I mean, you really can't set out to learn the skills until you have the foundational knowledge of what the problem is, why it's a problem, little theory behind it. Heaven forbid we make corporate pilots do math, but in the end, we've got to understand, what the concepts are.
Cool, great, thank you. I'm going to bring up the first question. It's by Rick Durham, Bull Durham. Good call sign, right? Wonder where he got that from. It's a two-part question, but I'm going to go ahead and bring it up here to show you guys to think about. And it's a two-part question. Let me see. Yeah, we can see both of them here. First one is, how much impact will rising global temperatures affect loss of control? And he shares that he can think of several. And then the second part is, we talk approach landing, LOC-I and departure. Final comment, LOC-I can occur wings level as well. Been there, especially at night. So while you guys are thinking about that, the one thing I'll comment on is increasing atmospheric temperature absolutely reduces the margin of safety at altitude. And so, for example, in the revision 2 of the Airplane Upset Recovery Training Aid in 2008, actually inserted a high altitude supplement for that air mass shift in temperature, where you go from a colder air mass into a warmer air mass, and unexpectedly you can get actually into a thrust limited, energy depleted condition, and very progressively and insidiously get into an airplane upset where the only option is to descend. And so it can substantially affect the performance of the airplane. So it really related to global temperatures, rising global temperatures. Well, if we look at it, just the reality of operating in a warmer air mass, it certainly affects performance. So maybe over to Jeff and Dave as operators, anything to add on that particular question on increasing temperatures?
I mean, you really hit the nail on the head, BJ. I think, with increasing temperatures, we're going to lose performance, especially at high altitude. And even you throw in the issues that we're having more thunderstorms. We've got weather systems that can pose more problems. So yeah, the way global temperatures affect us go across a wide spectrum.
Absolutely. Dave?
Yeah, and you're seeing higher buildups. So for those that are now able to go above issues, that capability is now being limited with storms getting into the 50, 60,000 range. And you really are having to divert versus deal with the other stuff. So
good point. Sonny, from your perspective, C5 Galaxy C-17 pilot, thoughts on rising temperatures at altitude or even low altitude? I'm assuming he means high altitude, but maybe there are other considerations. And I think Dave mentioned increasing weather challenges. Sonny?
Well, this is a great question, because it had me going all over the place as far as aircraft performance in an air mass that's less dense is essentially what we're talking about. And where my mind went with that was, what we hardly ever, if ever, talk about is the other end of the spectrum with aircraft performance, where you're at a high altitude and you're starting an initial descent, and you pitch over and you get close to your maximum Mach number. And with a less dense air mass, you could be getting closer to that in essence. So, Mach tuck, the different aircraft performances that you could lose control because you're going too fast. Keep that in mind. And BJ, you're the expert in this panel in that regard. But I've been in business jets where pilots are flying really close to the Buffett boundary. That's what I'm talking about, the Buffett boundary, and they don't even know it. Right. And if they just increase another 20 knots, we could lose control because we're going too fast.
Yeah, and it's not uncommon, especially at high altitude now, with dynamic speed tapes having much better awareness of what the margins are. You can have as little as a 1.3 G maneuvering margin, right? And that doesn't seem like a whole lot, because it's not. And it's really important to recognize that. This is actually a nice segue into part 2 of his question. Is that we talk approach, landing, LOC, and departure. Absolutely, loss of control can happen across the spectrum, from running down the runway and in the flare. In fact, another dimension of this is loss of control on ground, right? Which is another topic. But What I was wanting to get at here is that loss of control, when you mention, Rick, there about occurring at wings level, it's important to realize that an airplane upset is just not an attitude upset, not just pitch, not just bank, but inappropriate airspeed, which includes too slow, too fast, and inappropriate angle of attack as well, which can drive a stall situation. So Sonny's point about a high Mach number is also an airplane upset. Too slow or too high angle of attack is absolutely an upset. And interestingly enough, especially in a jet airplane, and we notice as jet pilots on approach, you can have a relatively normal attitude and have speed diversions and increasing drag and have a very rapidly increasing rate of descent with a very normal flight attitude. So that is absolutely an airplane upset for both angle attack and speed. So it can happen in a number of areas. So over to Dave and Jeff again on the question on loss of control and its implication both on approach landing and also on departure.
Yeah, I can definitely tell you that it happens on departure. I've been in 3 upsets in my career, 2 on departure. We were based at Lindbergh in San Diego, and single use runway, very busy flow. And even though we brief it before departure, swirling winds, a whole bunch of things moving wake vortices around, and on one of them through 45 degrees angle of bank. So shortly after takeoff. So it definitely happens on departure as well.
Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely. I mean, the thing about upsets, they can handle it. They can happen in any phase of flight. You can have people over rotate or reconfigure too quickly. You retract flaps and you're not really in the right speed margin to do that. You can get yourself into a problem. On the global summit we did last year, I talked about an event we had where we were in the departure phase. Well, and we were up in, around flight level 330 and got into an upset. And you don't really expect it at that point, but they can occur at any time. And, I think the one that gets the most attention nowadays is, of course, the things that are happening on the approach. We've had so many instances in the last 5 or 6 years. That's getting a lot of focus now.
Cool, great. Dave, I got your text. You need to leave at 15 past. So if you'd like to bail out on us, the rest of us will stay and take all the tough questions, Dave, and let you go.
Thanks for the top cover. I appreciate it, and great job, and look forward to doing the next one.
Well, thank you. And thank you to Embry-Riddle for letting you be here with us, Dave. So appreciate it, and you have a great day, and we'll catch up soon at base in a couple of weeks.
That sounds great. I'll punch out here in a couple minutes.
All right.
And we'll talk about you while you're gone.
Please do. Please do.
Sonny, anything else to add on the positioning of loss of control during a flight profile to add to anything talked about so far?
Yeah, well, it's to add to what we've spoken about so far, not specifically that question about temperature and things like that, but it was mentioned earlier about, just the training and being prepared with the knowledge before you apply the practical training in the jet or the aircraft for that matter. And you probably all heard, I'm sure you have, the 7 laws of learning. The FAA teaches that as an instructor pilot. And, you have your readiness, recency, repetition. All these things come together, but intensity is so important. And you won't get that intensity, I don't think, in a simulator. That intensity happens in the aircraft when you really feel that airplane do something and you see I'm really going upside down if I don't do something and I'm pointing towards the ground. That intensity stays with you much more than a simulator event. And so when you look at those laws of learning, which have been tried and proven over decades in the world of psychology, it really comes to bear here with UPRT.
Cool. Great, guys. Here's a quick question I want to address very quickly. So great one about, can you share any data on loss of control in the helicopter? So as the chairman of the MBAA Safety Committee, our loss of control and flight working group has data from the NTSB on the United States anyway. And excitingly, it includes helicopter loss of control as well. So it's something, of significance that we need to be aware of. And so we're in the process of actually refining that data right now to make it releasable. So I guess the best answer, unless Jeff or Sonny want to add something, is stay tuned. That data is coming. Jeff, Sonny?
Nothing for me.
Okay.
Yeah, When I first saw this question, I'm like, helicopters. But then it reminded me of an Air National Guard, I think it was, helicopter accident.
Yeah.
And it's probably 10 years old. But it's a formation of helicopters in marginal night VFR, but they get themselves into IMC conditions and they lose control. And as they get disoriented, I mean, the flight data analysis shows these two helicopters in formation. You know, it's so many moments they're like, they can recover, but they didn't sense it, they didn't do the right actions, and they didn't recover. So
yeah, absolutely, that's great, Sonny. And so the interesting part is there are organizations that provide helicopter loss of control training. One of the misnomers is that fixed wing upset prevention recovery training transfers to helicopters, and it largely does not. And so APS has a great article on our website about the relevance of fixed wing upset training to helicopter flight operations. So that's worth reading. I don't know if Carrie can find it super quick. We'll see, but she can put a link in there to that article. But that's important. So good comment. We don't often get helicopter questions, but makes me realize we need to spend a little bit more focus on that. Let me go ahead to this one here by Philip. What are the standards for UPRT training programs, time and frequency? Also, are Flight Safety International and CAE incorporating this into their programs? Unfortunately, that is the bulk of training that business aviation pilots see. So while Sonny and Jeff are thinking about that, the standards for UPRT, first off, ICAO created a great resource called ICAO Doc 111, 10011, at the ICAO level, which is not a regulatory agency, right? You need to keep that in mind, is that ICAO will help shape the national aviation authorities and what they implement. So that guidance, which is excellent, has led to a lot of great resources that have come out. And so in the FAA, they've largely embraced that at the 121 air carrier level, where they're required to implement effective type-specific stall upset prevention and recovery training, and also upset prevention recovery training as well. In the Europe, they've addressed it all the way across the spectrum, from initial corporate licensing all the way to corporate 135 operations and into the air carriers. So Europe, on that particular point, is ahead of other areas of the world. So EASA is setting a standard on that. But yes, so to answer your question is that CAE and Flight Safety International in Europe do integrate UPRT into their programs. And in the United States, they do as well, because it's required as a 121 air carrier requirement. And also in Europe, it's required at the various levels of operation. I will say, though, that the devil's in the details. Unfortunately, many organizations, and I'm not naming anybody, and I'm certainly not implicating Flight Safety and CAE, is very often out of sheer necessity on timing and resources will very often just repackage what they were doing before and call it UPRT, which is unfortunately going to sustain loss of control as the number one threat. So over to you, Jeff. Do you want to comment on that? I think the point of his question is that business aviation's pilot largely see whatever the major training centers are delivering. And I know that progressive flight departments can take control of that to some extent as well, right? Jeff, do you want to talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so Flight Safety and CAE do look at UPRT now. And like you mentioned, BJ, Europe has taken a much different approach to this, where they've got standards set up, and it's been implemented through pretty much all the regimes of flight training. And in that case, the United States is behind a little bit. I think the other thing is I agree completely with Philip in that most of the professional training we do is, especially in business aviation and in corporate aviation, is through people like SimCom, Flight Safety, and CAE. And so it's sort of a double-edged sword. There's starting to be more conversations about it. And Flight Safety has resources now. They've got a provider that's doing UPRT. And CAE has had a very capable ancillary provider for several years. And but the biggest problem is that they really don't discuss it much in the recurrence or the initial training, because the instructors at the facilities really aren't equipped to do that discussion. And as we mentioned earlier on, there's so much stuff that happens in an initial or in a recurrent they really don't take time or have the time to talk about UPRT, which is a mistake in my opinion. So yeah, they're trying to put programs together, but the biggest misconception is that people, there's different companies around that have mock air combat training that also have their version of UPRT that's available, and so you got to be very careful when you select UPRT, and it is up to the flight departments. If it's up to the directors to do the research and find out what's out there. And so you do your due diligence, and you look at the people that have honest to goodness progressive programs that teach UPRT the appropriate way, and you use them, and that can be something that's an added bonus to your regular simulator training. But yeah, CAE and flight safety are trying to do something, but it's not being promoted as well as I think it should be.
And I think the nice thing is the standard that Sunny and I talked about, the EPIC S2, every pilot and control solution standard, is a great tool to not only seek out UPRT, but assess providers as well. Are you delivering to a standard that meets industry and stakeholder expectations to a point that Sunny made? So,
as you remember too, BJ, I guess it was 4 years ago, when we were working together on the MBA safety committee, we actually developed some tools to help people set up or look at the training requirements for UPRT. And so that's a resource that's available.
Yeah, and that's actually still at mba.org/LOCI if you want to go take a look at that. They have great resources organized in there from a very progressive working group lead from many years ago got that underway. So Sunny, over to you. I kind of mentioned EPIC S2, but I don't want to put any words in your mouth there. What are your thoughts on corporate operators, which is really your sphere of operation, the corporate business, 135, 125? What are your thoughts on that when they're seeking out training like this?
Well, exactly. If any operator needs help, choosing a provider, and you're not sure exactly which way to go, just contact Wyvern. That's what we do. We can go to that provider. We can assess them against the EPIC S2 or the ICAO standards or any set of standards that you might want. But I would recommend the EPIC S2. We've worked diligently to create that document so that the industry can benefit from it, and ultimately the stakeholders, all the stakeholders. So just contact Wyvern. We'd be happy to engage with that training provider and conduct an assessment, and then give you the results of the assessment. You can make your decision whether you want to do business with them or not.
Cool. Great. Yeah. And the nice thing about corporate flight operations, usually they have the budget to make informed decisions and to seek out training they need to mitigate their risk. Great question by Christian. Do you know if the FAA is planning to implement a compulsory initial UPRT for professional pilots like EASA FCL 745A, which consists of a minimum of 5 academic and 3 on-aircraft hours? And so what he's referring to is the European requirement. So our operation over in Europe does provide FCL 740A advanced UPRT. Christian, at this point, really the only formal part of aviation that embraces required UPRT is the 121 air carriers. That said, the associated advisory circulars, which there's 3 of them, 12111, 12109A, and 12123, the most recent one, flight path management, applies to all operations and all training providers that they should be following that guidance, which is very robust in effectively implementing effective UPRT and what it contains. But I don't know of anything. And so we have several locations in the United States, both civilian and military. Years ago, the FAA was leading in their implementation of UPRT and stepped back from on-aircraft training with a genuine, real, rational concern of the instructors in the industry not being ready to implement it. Mm-hmm. And so they felt a better initial push was at the air carrier level. So one of the challenges we see in Europe is there's so much downward pressure on pricing and time and experience and the right assets to do it. Is very often what's happening is UPRT, not all of it, but very often what's happening is the UPRT program is being integrated into an existing program with the existing instructors that have very low experience using airplanes, which are really not optimum for the task at hand. And so it's in many situations in Europe, And again, not everybody, they're just going through the process of calling it done and ticking the export. So Jeff and Sunny, do you guys want to comment on that? I only see one more question. So I think we're going to be able to wrap up on time at the bottom of the hour. Jeff, over to you, and then Sunny.
No, I wish the FAA would take a little bit more of an aggressive stance, but I do understand why they don't. Because, as we talked earlier, I think the critical piece of this is you've got to have qualified instructors. Just because you can do aerobatics doesn't mean you can teach UPRT. They're two very different things. And so I think that's part of the issue. And I think the FAA is want to take a more conservative approach to it. But, I really do believe in it. And I think that at some point we're going to see this coming into play a lot more as time goes on.
Sunny?
Yeah, I think the FAA is still dragging their feet to mandate safety management systems for Part 135. It's going to happen now. It's taken forever, and we don't know exactly when it's going to happen. But for Part 91 corporate operators, there's nothing on the horizon. So if they're dragging their feet on that, I don't see them, really addressing loss of control of flight. I could be wrong, but it's just a different world. I'm not saying they're doing it wrong either. I know they take a risk-based approach. And to your point, BJ, there's probably too many potential UPRT providers out there with less than adequate aircraft, less than adequate instructors. And so you have to be really careful. I'm sure the FAA doesn't want to unleash a bunch of risk out there in the industry for this. So the good news is you have great providers like APS and others that want to emulate and meet the highest standards in the industry. So there is a solution.
Yeah, very well said. And so further that previous question. So for example, United Aviate Academy here in Arizona, they subcontract APS to deliver the program. We deliver in compliance with industry requirements by ICAO and EASA, and then beyond that. Not only do we meet the minimum 5-hour and 3-hour on aircraft, we introduce preparatory online academic training, a deep dive on the academics to prepare them. They get the on-aircraft training, also get their CFI spin endorsement, and they have a dedicated simulator session to ensure that there's opportunity to take advantage of the integrated approach. So it's not just academic, not just on aircraft, not just simulation, but all of it delivered in a transferable way. So in that particular case, sometimes it's not the insurance agencies, it's not the regulatory authorities that make a difference. It's the industry leaders like United and United Aviate Academy that just take the bull by the horn and say, we need safe pilots. Regulated or not, this is what has to be done to accomplish that. So, I applaud United, the United Aviate Academy for doing that, and the many other airlines and organizations and flight schools that pursue that. Okay, absolutely. Last question, guys. That's all right. Anything to add on that? Last question. Are loss of control in flight incidents occurring more frequently VFR or IMC conditions, and how has technology in the cockpit impacted LOC-I? So let me throw that over the fence to you guys, and then I can maybe circle in for a few comments. Jeff, what are your thoughts on that? And then over to Sunny, and then I'll have a final comment before we wrap today.
Okay, so I think you have to look at it. If you take a look at the last few incidents, they've occurred in either VFR or marginal VFR conditions where people are doing a circling approach. The accident in Teterboro was clear skies, and it was windy conditions, but it was in VFR conditions. And then the Challenger accident in Truckee was in basically marginal VFR conditions, and they were doing a circling approach. So it's sort of a loaded question. A lot of people are transitioning from IFR flight into a VFR approach and having the loss control incident. But we're still seeing we're seeing a lot of incidents where we're having problems in the traffic pattern, even during instruction flights, where the instructor and the student both get behind, and they have an incident in the traffic pattern. And as far as technology, I think in some ways technology's helped us, but I also think in some ways technology's hurt us. We've had such a focus on the technically advanced aircraft since the early 2000s that we've not put the appropriate focus on manual handling skills. And so and the other thing too is, depending on how you've got the displays configured, you can have too much on the screen. And if you go back and you think about the display that BJ had up on the screen earlier with the EFIS display showing the approaching into the skidded stall, sometimes it's easy to get lost in the forest. There's so much to look at. Technology can cause a problem. some of the systems actually deconflict things. They get all the non-essential stuff out of the way. When something happens, we get a stall warning. It'll declutter the screen. But I think technology, while it's been helpful in some things, you've got EGPWS that warns you when you're over bank. You've got warnings if your sink rate's not right and things like that. I think it's great. But by the same token, we can't become reliant on the technology, and we've got to understand what we're looking at and be equipped to apply the appropriate corrections when they happen, or be able to foresee what's going on and do something way before it happens.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Sonny, comments to add before we wrap today?
Yeah, there's so many ways you could go with this question. I love it. But I'm just going to look at it just from the last part, technology and how does it help or hurt. And I'm just kind of piggyback a little bit on what Jeff said. I mean, from practical experience, I was part of the initial cadre for the Falcon 7X. We were developing the pilot training program. And it was amazing that the OEM said, you don't have to train stall training. The airplane will not let you stall. So don't even worry about that. So it was this aircraft that was like, just trust it. You will never get hurt in this airplane. No matter what you do, it's going to override your stupidity and keep you in a safe envelope. But our pushback was, as an instructor group, was like, but what if we're in alternate laws? What if the flight control system is not behaving normally? What if we're in direct laws where there's no protections? Well, it can't really get there according to the statistics, the probabilities, and all this kind of stuff. So, in the one hand, technology teaches us to be lazy pilots and not be capable. On the other hand, the technology is awesome. I mean, in the future, all airplanes will be fly-by-wire. All airplanes will take over when you try to take it in an out-of-control situation. Yeah. But the airplanes, just like humans, are not 100%. So we always need to be ready to fly.
Well, coming from an Airbus fleet and seeing, for example, in the last session one, where one of the highest rates of precursor upsets were the A350. And also when you're flying an A320 or A3 or fourth generation Airbus, where there's a similar claim that this can't happen. Well, go have a look at session one and you'll see it does happen. And in fact, can you stall a Airbus in normal law? You absolutely can. Can it get upset? Absolutely it can. So one of the biggest parts of an Airbus implementation UPRT program, to Sonny's point, is not just dealing with situations of normal law, but alternate law, alternate one, alternate two, abnormal attitude law, direct law. And there's a lot of things for the pilots to understand how to handle as it transitions from a super smart airplane that's not so smart at the moment into a more conventional airplane. So with that, gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. It's been a great session. We went a little bit long, but it's in the name of safety. Thank you. And everybody who's still out there online, thank you for being here. If you have an opportunity, please go have a look at session 3 is underway right now in general aviation, but certainly join us all in session 4, where our safety auditors are all getting together with the speakers and the hosts of the various sessions to address solutions, challenges, and questions. So with that, gentlemen, thank you. Everybody out there, take care, and we'll see you at the next event. Bye-bye.
Have a great day.